Michelle huffed angrily as she noticed that her dream catcher had fallen off the ceiling again. She checked under the bed, behind the nightstand, even in the bathroom in case it had rolled inside. Nothing. No dream catcher, no sign of where it had gone. It wasn't as if this was uncommon or anything. Michelle had been replacing dream catchers for most of her life, but the older she got, the more annoying it became. Michelle went to the closet and opened a box labeled Decor, sorting through dozens of dream catchers that she had inside. This just happened sometimes. It had happened since she was young, and she'd gotten used to just replacing them. She picked up a frilly pink one, the leather around the ring dyed to match, but put it back. This one had been a gift, and she didn't want to waste it. She settled on a cheap neon blue one from the gas station and attached it to a hook over her bed. She hated to buy more, but the alternative was worse. The alternative was something that she hadn't experienced since she was very young. Michelle's mother had been fiercely spiritual. Trina Jones had stood out like a sore thumb among the community of strict Baptists and Methodists. Her mother had done a little of this and a little of that to get by, and Michelle had a tumultuous childhood. They lived in a little house that had been owned by her grandmother, and Michelle couldn't remember a time when her grandmother had come to the house for longer than a few minutes. She'd asked her why she never came over once, Michelle spending the night while her mother went to a concert with some friends. She and her grandmother had been shelling peas on the porch of Grandma's house, just on the other side of the block, and her grandmother's scowl had been hard to miss at the time. "I hate to see what your mother's done to that house. It offends my senses, but God forgive me, I won't cast her out. She's free to live her life however she likes, but that doesn't mean I have to let her rub it in my face." Her mother had an odd hodgepodge of beliefs, and Michelle could remember all of them jostling together in the living room of their small house. Trina, though her grandmother had always called her Grace, was an old hippie, and she had been taken with paganism and druidic ideas as she followed her friends on the road before Michelle was born. She had also liked the ideas of Buddhism, Taoism, and several other Eastern spiritualities. As such, the living room was often crowded with altars, statues, and other paraphernalia for whatever ritual or rite her mother was working on. The dream catchers were a part of it. Michelle had always suffered from terrible nightmares, and her mother had hung the dream catchers over her bed since she was very young. Her mother had also noticed the rate at which the dream catchers disappeared, but if she knew why, she never said. To Michelle, it was always just a fun mystery that never seemed to have an answer, like where the socks went when you lost them in the dryer. Michelle hung the new dream catcher over her bed and got back to getting ready for work. She had bills to pay and, inevitably, more dream catchers to buy. She found herself thinking back to the mystery of where all the dream catchers went as her workday slowed down. She tried to puzzle out where they might be disappearing to, but ultimately came up with nothing. As a kid, she had tried everything. She had nailed them to the ceiling. She had set up little nets to catch them if they fell. She had gone so far as to set up a little camera one night to see if someone was taking them. But the recordings had stopped at 11 when it ran out of tape. She hadn't really thought about it in a long time, but the more she pondered it, the more curious she became. She made a mental note to set up her phone camera tonight and see if she could find out what was taking them. The phone wouldn't run out of tape, unlike her video camera, and maybe she could figure out what was going on. 4 nights later, and 3 deleted 8-hour recordings later, Michelle woke up to find her phone knocked over and her neon blue dream catcher missing. The video that she scrolled through that day at lunch was less than helpful. The phone had recorded the dream catcher until about 2 a.m., seeing nothing but the dust motes and the circles of feathers on the strings that hung from the ceiling. Then, at 2:07, Michelle heard a soft sound like a latch being slid, and the window had whispered open. A shadow passed over the camera, which was knocked over a few seconds later. No matter how many times she rewound the footage, Michelle couldn't tell what had knocked the camera over. It recorded nothing else but darkness for the rest of the night, until she had picked it up in the morning and turned it off. That gave her something new to worry about. Who was stealing her dream catchers, and why? Surely it couldn't be the same person all these years. She'd been losing dream catchers since she was 3 years old. She had moved 2 states away from her childhood home and moved into 3 different dorm rooms before settling into this apartment. It couldn't be the same person. But then, who was it? As she sat in traffic that day, she felt moved to call her mother, and as she dialed the number, she felt silly. What did she think her mother was going to do about it? Her mother had been a rolling stone ever since Michelle had left home 3 years ago, and the notion that she'd even be reachable was laughable. Trina had been the big push for her to accept the offer from Tennessee State College. She'd set her daughter down, pulling her away from her studies as she tried not to bomb her final and lose her acceptance letter. She told her that she'd been sent a spiritual vision and that it was time for her to travel. This vision didn't have anything to do with her latest man, Beau, and had everything to do with her wanderlust needing to be satiated. I'll stick around long enough for you to graduate, but after that, I'm hitting the road and giving the keys back to your grandmother. Michelle hadn't talked to her much in those 3 years, but she thought she might have some insight in this. She picked up on the fourth ring, and Michelle could hear soft guitar music and the sounds of laughter in the background. "Hey, sweetie, what's the occasion? I haven't heard from you in months." I need to talk to you about something. I'm a little scared, and it's kind of important." Michelle heard the sound quiet as her mother walked away or stepped into someplace. "What's wrong, Micah? You need a reading or some crystal healing? I can send you some vibrations through the phone if you..." But Michelle cut her off before she could get going. If she let Trina get rolling, they'd be on the phone all night. "I need to know about the dream catchers. Why did they go missing?" There was a long pause, and Michelle was worried that she had lost her. "Mom, are you still hanging them?" she asked. And it wasn't the voice she was used to hearing from her mother. It was low and scared, at odds with her mother's usual gregarious nature. "Of course, but I've been thinking a lot about them lately, and I just..." "Don't stop hanging them, Michelle. I know it's a pain, but trust me, they help. But why do I..." "Just..." She paused as she got control of herself again. "Just keep hanging them. If you need more, I'll send you some. I know a guy out there who makes them, and he owes me a favor. I'll get you some in bulk, but please, just hang them. And stay safe." "Safe from what?" Michelle asked, getting frustrated. Her mother had never been this serious, and it scared her more than the video had. Her mother clearly knew something, but she wouldn't tell her. She had never been good at keeping secrets, and Michelle didn't understand why she wanted to start now. I gotta go. She seemed to gather her thoughts as she tried to find a way to explain. "Just keep hanging them, and stay safe. I love you, Michelle. I'll send you some dream catchers soon so you don't run out." Then she hung up on her, and Michelle was left confused and agitated. She thought about what her mother had told her for the rest of the night. The way she had acted scared Michelle, and the transition from her mother's nickname to her real name had made it all the more jarring. Her mother had started calling her Micah when she was a kid, thinking it sounded more earthy, and Michelle hadn't heard her use her real name in quite a while. She had started to hang a new dream catcher, but paused midway through trying to hook it up there. The more she thought about it, the more she saw no reason to hang a new one. She'd had bad dreams when she was younger, but it was something that she hadn't experienced in a long time. Who's to say that the dream catchers had done anything? She froze there, unsure whether to proceed, and finally, she just tossed the dream catcher onto the nightstand. She'd sleep without it tonight and see what happened. Worst case scenario, she had a bad dream that night and would wake up and put a new one up. It took some time to get to sleep, but Michelle was sure that tonight would be as fine as all the others before it. When she woke up midway through the night, she was glad. The dream she'd been having was terrifying, but it was nothing compared to what she had woken up to. Her dreams had been incredibly dark. She had woken up in a hellscape, the sky constantly burning as the rain came down in runners of flames. She was lying naked on the hard stone, her body pulled close as she shuddered. All around her there were creatures gathering, their growls like thunder. She closed her eyes, trying to wake up, but it just never seemed to happen. She was stuck, waiting for these creatures to come in on her, and as the first lunged at her, its bony mouth snapping, she came awake like a deep sea diver from the depths. She thought for a moment that she was still sleeping, until she felt the pressure in her ear. She had never felt anything so intimate, so violating, and the feeling made her shudder in utter terror. She swiveled her gaze to the left and saw something large and pale crouching beside the bed. It looked like a giant white bug, its body pale and wrinkled. It was hunkered below the side of the bed, like a kid wanting to ask a question. Its bald head gleamed in the moonlight, and Michelle realized that her window was open again. The long red tongue that slid over the edge of the bed and into her ear was as hard to miss as the pale horror kneeling there. The tongue bulged her eardrum, making her head feel far fuller than she was used to. It felt like it might be going all the way to her brain. What was he doing? Was he trying to eat her? What was going on? The tongue slid soupily out of her ear as his piss-yellow eyes grew large. He had noticed that she was awake. As it reached its full height, Michelle realized how big it was. 7 feet tall, each arm tipped with 6 long claws. As it loomed over her, Michelle worried that it would finish what it had started. Its long tongue slid over its thin lips, and they turned up at the corners as it took her in. "Don't worry," it whispered, its voice high and waspish. "I need you alive so I can continue to feed. I must admit, it's nice to get a taste from the source again. I usually get your tasty floating snacks, but today I got a real treat from the old country." Its tongue slid over its lips again, its face a rapture as it remembered the flavor. It climbed out of her window, its body groaning as its bones leaned into the twists. But Michelle felt utterly paralyzed. She didn't understand what was going on. What in the world was that? Had that been what her mother had been trying to protect her from? Had she known about it? Why hadn't she just told her? Michelle pulled her knees to her chest, the terror sending shudders up her frame, and as the birds began to chirp and the sun sent pink fingers over the edge of her window, she finally reached for her phone. Her mother sounded sleepy when she picked up, but it sounded like she might have been expecting the call. "So, you saw it, then?" Michelle couldn't answer right away, managing only a small grunt of acknowledgement. "Did it hurt you? It never did when you were a kid, but you knew it would come after me then?" It wasn't a question. When you were young, you started having night terrors. You would wake me up every night with the most terrible screaming, and I didn't know what to do. Worse than that, you drew pictures of the dreams the next day. Flaming skies, terrible creatures, just the bleakest places imaginable. I didn't know what to do. One night I woke up before you started screaming and felt like I needed to go make sure you were okay. That was when I saw it. He was leaning down over you, his tongue coming out of your ear, and he seemed to be drinking something out of your head. He ran when he saw me, bending out of the window like a serpent, and that only deepened my confusion. That was when I tried the dream catchers. It was on a whim. I didn't know whether it would work, but when it stopped your night terrors, I thought that maybe it kept him away. When they started disappearing, I figured out what was going on." She stopped, collecting her thoughts, and Michelle could hear the sounds of crickets making music in the background. Wherever she was, it was someplace green. Michelle could almost see the trees and feel the breeze, and she suddenly wished that she was with her. Was this why Mom had traveled so much? Was she running from something too? Michelle suddenly realized how little she knew about her mother, and wished that she had taken the time to learn more. The dream catchers don't do anything besides what they're supposed to. They take your dreams and store them inside those strings. Whatever these things are, and I mean things because I don't believe there's just one of them. They like eating your nightmares. The dream catchers distract them, give them something to eat instead. That's why you need to keep hanging them. Michelle wanted to ask more, wanted to know if her mom had any idea about the places she saw in her dreams, but instead, she just reached for the dream catcher on her nightstand. I'll be in touch," Michelle whispered, hanging up as She stood on the bed to attach it to the ceiling. She wouldn't feel safe again until it was back in place. In truth, Michelle wondered if she'd ever feel safe again. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. If you're too spooked to go on, then I'll understand if you want to bail out now. But if you think you could handle a little more, go ahead and click one of those other videos you can see displayed on the screen. If you enjoyed yourself and you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky stuff we do here. Maybe even leave me a little comment. I like it when people comment. If you think you might like to support the show more monetarily, you can always come down to Patreon, or maybe buy a book. I have links below for both. Speaking of patrons, let's go ahead and thank our patrons. Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks to Xaronana, Emily Coltsfoot, Martha, Marianne Schuler, and Jennifer Damron for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, guys. We just couldn't do it without you. If you haven't come on down and checked out Patreon yet, what are you waiting for? We have lots of cool tiers and lots of cool rewards down there, especially to my Ghostly Reader tier contributors, which make up the bulk of it. They get a book whenever I write one, signed on their doorstep, ready just for them. If that sounds like something you might be interested in, come on down and have a look. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.